talking about Tiger King before we get on to anything else, because you've just watched that latest episode, so that's still fresh in your mind. But what were your thoughts on Tiger King?
Tiger King was absolutely crazy. It was wonderfully crazy, and it was very refreshing to see so many wonderfully crazy and wonderfully complex people in a real life setting. King, what about yourself?
I loved it. I just, again, as you say, people being wonderfully crazy. It was nice to watch something that wasn't so polished. And yes, obviously, there's an element of people aren't themselves, people aren't 100% real, but it was as real as I think you could get for a setting like that. And it was something that I loved it, and I don't understand myself for loving it so much either, because he was clearly bat crap crazy.
Joe Exotic was obviously sort of staged as the protagonist, and in much the same way as Walter White was the protagonist in Breaking Bad, Joe Exotic was the protagonist of this, and you couldn't help but love him even though he was awful on every level. And I found myself rooting for him even though he was doing terrible things and everybody kind of hated him.
Yeah, I agree. It was a weird thing actually really liking him as a person when you knew in reality he's not a good person to like. Like some of the things that we didn't know about him during the show that I find fascinating watching that last episode there last night. He was terrified of tigers. That is unbelievable. He was terrified of them. But whenever I found out that he was putting the tigers down that didn't need to, and the one that he shot in the head because it tried to bite him, you know, this was a guy who claimed to be the Tiger King and loved these animals and looked after them, and in reality he was just really cruel. But the way it was shown, and Netflix have a wonderful way of doing that. They have a wonderful way of showing us what they want to see. It was the same as a show, I don't know if you ever saw it, it was called The Staircase, where you really rooted for the guy in it, but he was up for murdering his wife, and he probably did it. But the way they portrayed it, you know, they show you what they want to see. So the reality of who these people are isn't what we see. So we saw this guy who loved tigers and was so hard done by with Carole Baskin coming in at every angle to try and stop him doing what he loved, when in reality he was just a cruel person that didn't really like him. He was just in it for the fame and money.
The interesting point that you brought up there a couple of times with the Tiger King, and it's absolutely true, is that the Tiger King documentary has presented. A lot of people have said that they aren't happy with how they've been presented, and it's the extent to which how much are we is everything present us in a certain respect. It was a well told narrative, but it was also possibly and probably a false narrative. But false narratives aren't necessarily bad, and I'm kind of making a semi-political point here. Just because something's fake news doesn't necessarily mean it's bad news. You know, there's a whole lot of truths from certain perspectives that are interesting to listen to and interesting to watch, and that some people's truths contradicted other people's truths was a fascinating thing about it.
I love how you articulate things so much better than me, but when I'm listening to you, I'm like, yes, that's it. That's the words I want to use.
Yes. See, Carole Baskin's truth is that she is the protagonist. Joe Exotic's truth is that he is the protagonist. What I call Lowe is his truth is that he is the protagonist, and you know, they all believe themselves to be the protagonist, and they all kind of are. And the wonderful complexity to human nature is that we are all the protagonist, except that we still find ourselves rubbing people the wrong way from time to time. And the overall arcing narrative of this documentary is that Joe Exotic is kind of the protagonist, even though he's terrible. But I think that more than showing us about animal cruelty, this shows us, because this documentary has very little to do with animals, this documentary has to do with the complex nature of humanity. And tigers are the backdrop, and that was what I particularly enjoyed about watching this documentary. And it's not about tigers at all. It's about the flawed nature of human nature.
Yeah, I agree, and I love that each and every person that was in this show was messed up in their own way. I mean, some of the, like his first husband, with the no teeth and always having the shirt off. It's interesting, I've seen 2 interviews with him. One where he said that it was Joe and the producers who told him to take his shirt off. But last night, talking to Joe, or I saw when he was talking to Joe McHale, he actually said that, well, if you had a body like mine with all those tattoos, you would take your shirt off too. And I find that interesting that he's contradicted himself in different videos. But it's very interesting whenever you look at the people that he went with. His husbands, who weren't actually legal, his husbands, shockingly enough. I don't think it's legal in any state for you to marry 2 people at once.
I don't actually know, but I'm not an authority.
But he seemed to pick people who were a wee bit vulnerable, and he could kind of, they were attractive in their own way. Obviously, John having no teeth wouldn't have done it for me, but in every other sense, he actually is quite an attractive guy. And you could see where with Joe wanting his fame and everything, that's why he was drawn to these people. And also for the sake of the show, you could see how he knew that these people were going to be good viewing.
I think that this is the number one thing about Joe Exotic being the protagonist of this narrative, is that Joe Exotic does have a certain charm. He may or may not have a certain attractiveness. You would be more the authority on that than I would be, but he definitely has a certain charisma, a certain je ne sais quoi that you can't turn away from. You know, as soon as he is in your documentary, you've got a fantastic leading man that you just can't help but be endeared towards, no matter what he does. And it's, you know, he can do no wrong somehow, even though he does plenty of wrong. His charm, obviously these vulnerable people are endeared to his charm, and I'm kind of endeared to his charm too. I can't help but envy him in some way or admire him. What are your thoughts?
Being in prison.
After watching last night's episode, it would not surprise me at all if he did that. I know that for me, I think he probably did do that. What do you think?
I think he deserves for everything he's done. I mean, let's face it, all of them have said, he offered me money, he told me to do it, he begged me to do it. You know, I think the writing is on the wall there. He did. I actually saw something popped up there a wee while ago on my YouTube recommendations, a couple of videos saying Trump vows to look into Joe Exotic.
Yes, I actually watched the interview on that in the Telegraph. He was asked by a journalist if he'd heard about it, and Trump is the president of the United States. He hasn't watched it and he knows nothing about it, so he was asking the journalist about it, like, what is this? I mean, Donald Trump is presently overseeing the biggest crisis America's ever faced, so he didn't know anything about the Tiger King, and I would be more worried if he did know something about the Tiger King, personally, because I want the President of the United States to be worrying about the COVID-19 virus. I mean, call me old-fashioned, you know, I would be worried if the President had an opinion on this, but he did say he was going to look into it, which I imagine just means asking somebody before not taking... Presidential pardons are rare in American politics. So it's unlikely that he's going to get any sort of presidential pardon. I don't know the exact statistics, but I'm pretty sure it's less than 100 a year or something. And that's for people that are definitely innocent, usually of drug offences. It's a real sort of hot button topic in American politics. So it's, you know, I wouldn't be holding out hope that he's going to pardon Joe Exotic.
My thing about it was, I just laughed thinking, this is his daily chat with the journalists, talking about what he's doing with COVID-19, what's happening next, what's going on with their lockdowns and all of that. And somebody asks him about the fact that his son had posted about trying to help Joe Exotic, and they're saying, are you going to... And you're like, as you said, this is the President of the United States. There is no way that he is going to sit down and put any time and effort into this, because if he did, we don't want him in there.
Exactly.
You know, at the end of the day, as you said, again, it's the biggest crisis this world has seen for centuries. We don't want him sitting down watching Tiger King. He can do that once we're all away from all of this. He can watch it all back. It's on Netflix.
Yes.
But I'm happy that Donald Trump does not know who the Tiger King is, although maybe he could do his hair like his. Should show him that, just shake his hairdo up a bit.
Yes, yes. I think that would be very popular if he did. do that. Now, I think that would be a funny meme if Donald Trump was to get involved and kind of do his hair like Joe Exotic. I think that would win him some fans in Oklahoma. Not that he particularly needs fans in Oklahoma now, let's be honest, but
No, so that was a good one. But let's talk about Carole Baskin. Everybody's talking about how she killed her husband and fed him to the tigers. I find this one amazing because part of me wants it to be true.
I want it to be true.
Yeah, but I actually don't believe it is. I mean, again, with the whole Netflix shows us what they want us to see. So they want us to believe that there is a chance that he did this or that she did this, and her husband can't just drop off the face of the earth because that doesn't happen. But it does. In reality, it happens all the time.
Okay.
You know, so maybe he did just disappear. I mean, if I was married to Carole Baskin, I would want to drop off the face of the earth as well. You know, we don't know his background. We don't know what else was going on to make him disappear. But I don't think that she killed him, as much as it would make it even better if she had.
Are you team Joe Exotic here? Are you kind of on the team hating Carole Baskin bandwagon, or are you sort of... I see kind of they're as bad as each other, pretty much. It's...
I'm on the fence.
Yes. But Carole Baskin, it's sort of like I am more drawn to hate or something because I don't know, like Joe's got the charm, whereas Carole Baskin political, but it's basically the fundamental difference between the left and right in American politics right now. You know, she thinks she's doing the best and he thinks he's doing the best, and so he's kind of like the right and she's kind of like the left, and they're both the protagonists. They both absolutely think they're doing the right thing, but they're as bad as each other. And it's interesting that in their own narratives they are the protagonist, and for a lot of people it's kind of easier to hate Carole Baskin because she doesn't have the charm than it is to hate Joe Exotic because he has the charm, you know, or at least that was how it was filmed.
Yeah, I would agree, and I think the fact that we know what Joe's doing, we know that right from the start. You know, he has tigers in captivity, he's showing them off and letting people come and see them, whereas Carole comes along and is all, no, I'm here to stop all of this, and in reality she has a zoo herself. You know, it's not a sanctuary, it's not there to save the animals. She's doing the exact same thing. But she tried to portray herself as this great person trying to stop all of this. And I think that's why more people hate her than him, because she pretended to be good when really she wasn't.
Yeah. It kind of, it seems to me like the underlying theme of the Tiger King was to like pastiche contemporary American society and the difference between the left and the right, maybe to parody Trump versus Hillary, or maybe to parody just the left versus the right generally, the kind of social... God, how have I managed to talk about politics? But this was my kind of impression of the show whenever I was watching it, was that it's about almost like the really important issues get drawn to the background because we're engaged in political theatre. And so the important issue here was the tigers. Am I overthinking about this?
No, I agree. I do agree with you.
Yes, but so the theatre is that Carole on the left is sort of virtue signaling her higher virtue. Joe on the right is kind of a bit more upfront about not being as virtuous and kind of more plain spoken. And in all of this theatre, the important issues like global warming, whatever other important global issues are happening right now, are kind of being drawn to the background while they're engaged in a feud which kind of doesn't really matter and which kind of screws all of us. And that's kind of been why I have really enjoyed watching The Tiger King, because it was a complete kind of... It put our contemporary world into kind of an easy to process thing for people on both sides of the political spectrum, to kind of see that, you know, that they are as bad as the other side. And I think that some people who are on either side find it difficult to see the bad points of their side, but there you got to see the bad points of both sides and maybe root for one or the other. And most people are rooting for Joe in the same way as a lot of people are rooting for Trump, you know. And it's sort of, it shows that to people who maybe don't understand it, but a whole lot of people don't realise that it's showing them that in a way in which they maybe don't understand it.
It's interesting that you compared Joe to Trump, because just whenever I talk about Carole and Joe, makes me think of back whenever Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump were running for president, and you were screwed if you went with this one, you were screwed if you went with this one. That's Carole and Joe.
Exactly.
You know, neither are perfect.
Neither are good. Neither are kind of even. Neither are looking after the animals, basically. You know, and that's kind of, or both think they're looking after the animals, and both probably do enough for the animals to get by. But you kind of wouldn't want either. It was wonderful, and that it was a documentary, and that it was real life, and that a lot of these outlandish things happened, which we're going to need to come on to now, because a lot of outlandish things happened.
Yes.
First outlandish thing was what? Well, the marriage. Let's talk about marriage first of all.
Yeah.
I couldn't care less that he was gay. So I don't know, and I don't care less that he's in a trifecta marriage, or I don't know what the correct terminology of that is. But I suppose it was an interesting character trait. And the movie didn't present it as if anybody really cared, because nobody does really care.
No, and I think that's good to see as well. I think that was something that struck me, that it was just there. It wasn't a big story that he was this gay person, that he had two husbands, and, you know, it just was. And I think that is amazing that we live in a time now where people are just more going, alright, he's got husbands. I've got a wife. He's got husbands. You know, this is just life. But I don't know, there was something about his husbands that I just found so vulnerable, and probably the fact that they were hooked on meth, you know, didn't really help. But part of me felt sad for them, because you knew that they weren't 100% happy the whole time. And I haven't listened to their interviews after. Well, sorry, obviously we can't listen to Travis. But listening to John afterwards, you seen how he really wasn't happy, and it is one of those things, you kind of get stuck in a place where you're getting something for it, but you're not actually happy in it, you know.
I think that we've all been there. I think that this is kind of a wonderful little subplot. Yes, they were young, yes, they were vulnerable, but we've all been there at a place in our lives where we thought at the time that we were happy doing what we were doing and whatever, and we could all empathise with, especially, you know, Travis, who was very, very pretty to be married to Joe Exotic, you know, like he's up, you know. I mean, John to a lesser extent, yes, young and, you know, whatever, but, you know, I couldn't help but notice that Travis was very beautiful for a man, like. So do we move on to Travis then? Is that where the natural conversation topic is taking us?
Let's sidestep over into the whole Travis thing. Like, I still find that so shocking. You know, how he was just standing having a conversation with, I can't think of his name.
I can't think of his name now either. The campaign manager.
The guy from the campaign.
Aye.
Let's just say that, the campaign guy.
Yes.
I was just having a conversation saying to him, oh yeah, it won't fire because it didn't have what? There was something not there. And the next thing, he's dead.
Yes. Did you hear the campaign guy saying on the most recent episode, like, that he kind of looked confused and shocked for 5 seconds?
Yeah, I mean, how do you come back from seeing that?
Yeah.
Because it must have felt like a lifetime to him, watching him see that, once he realised that he was going to kill himself, that was actually happening. For campaign guy to be sitting watching that must have felt like so long. Not just a couple of split seconds before he was dead, but that must have felt like a lifetime. And I'm sure every single day in his life he plays that over and over. I don't think that part should have been aired. I know we didn't see him, but I think they should have taken that out.
Yeah. Obviously that absolutely devastated kind of everybody in the whole entire thing. And it was absolutely shocking. Like, I couldn't believe that a documentary had that in it. As you were saying. But I think it was a better documentary for having it in it.
I just don't like that they capitalised on that. But then, I mean, during the funeral, jokes aside, you know, so of course he was going to put it in, you know, because he couldn't just stick with having a funeral for him. He had to show what actually happened, show somebody's trauma. You know, yes, we didn't get to see him actually die, but we saw someone see it happen. You can imagine how many times he has replayed that clip over and over and over again.
Yes. And then we move on. What do you call the transgender woman? Zay or Zappa or something?
I didn't know that she was transgender until I watched that episode.
Yes. I thought she was just a lesbian when watching the show. But yes, so she or he, we're gonna need to be. We'll say he. He like obviously got his arm bitten off. He was absolutely committed to the Tigers and stuff. And yes, I was reminded of his story just there now from watching the most recent episode, which I'm just after watching. But yes, he is absolutely committed to the Tigers and stuff. And yeah, there was a tragedy that he lost so much, and quite a lot of people lost so much.
Amazing how even after losing an arm, he was still right back in there. While he was still healing, he was still in there working with those tigers. Yes, I do believe that, I think he said that he didn't work with that same tiger again, which is fair enough. But he still just kept working with tigers. I don't know that I could. I don't care how much I like them, but you know, the tiger took any of my limbs away. I don't think I'd want to work with them anymore. I'd be afraid of losing another one.
Yes. And he's doing that for £100 a week, and he is losing limbs and getting that accident played for every new member of staff. And for £100 a week, you have to really like tigers.
I would want £100 per training seminar that was shown in. Never mind £100 a week for working there.
Yes, I can't agree more. What do you think of your man Lowe? You know, the businessman who kind of became his partner?
Yeah. Jeff and his wife were a bizarre one. You know, he came in all guns blazing, and of course Joe was all like, he's stealing my zoo, and actually probably did them a favour. I mean, let's face it, he was the one that had money, he was the one that came along and helped them, and he's the reason that the zoo is actually still there. You know, if it wasn't for him, those tigers would all be dead by now.
Yeah. It was sort of like the movie, or the documentary. It cast it from Joe Exotic's point of view. Joe Exotic was obviously the protagonist, and as such a dynamic character, how can he not be? But yeah, Jeff Lowe, especially in last night's episode, or whenever it was that it was aired, came across completely differently than he did in the documentary. Like, we saw him argue with Joe, we saw him lose his temper, we saw a lot of people say bad things about him, and probably in real life that's not the true narrative. And that's one of the fascinating things, and I can't help but just keep bringing this back to politics, because somehow definitely there's a political undertone here. There's a lot of, maybe not fake news, but news from a certain perspective that's going around today. And it's hard to know what the correct perspective is nowadays in contemporary political landscape. And this is what I thought whenever I was watching it. This is the perfect analogy to explain fake news to people, is that the truth you're being told is probably not the truth. It's a truth from a certain perspective.
I would agree. It's like reading things from different newspapers. You could be reading about the same thing, but reading it in very different views. You know, we're told what they want us to hear, and when it comes to Netflix, with any documentary, they have a beautiful way of filming and putting it all together and showing us exactly what they want us to see. And as you're saying, we saw all the bad bits of Jeff, and the reality is, yeah, he likes to have extramarital sex along with his wife, and, you know, he likes to do whatever he does, you know. But he actually probably isn't that bad of a guy. You know, we just saw him going crazy because that's what Joe and the producers of this show wanted us to see, because they wanted us to root for Joe. They wanted us to root for him, and Jeff is this big bad wolf coming along to blow down his house.
Yes, I mean, basically, it's kind of none of my business or none of your business what they do as a loving couple anyway, as a loving couple. You know, if that works for them, then that works for them. If they're not engaged in criminal activity, then fair enough. Although the documentary did heavily insinuate that they were engaged in other criminal activity, that their extramarital stuff is not the criminal activity, so it's not for me to judge, and I don't really care. You know, and I think most people don't really care, although I think that was kind of included in the documentary to incite people who might care, or incite people to kind of see him more as an antagonist because of those things, whereas in reality it doesn't matter, you know. Again, I can't help but bring this back to politics and sort of be like, they keep telling us about the kind of sexual infidelities of our politicians, and most of us just don't care. You know, that's not what we're judging our politicians on, is their extra. And some people want to get all high and mighty and cast that person as an antagonist for their lawful extramarital affairs. I couldn't care less. You know, at the end of the day, it's about the tigers. You know, and is he going to look after the tigers? And that's what I care about. And that was sort of the political theatre that we are so often engaged in seems to think that we care, or seems to incite people to care. But I don't.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. Just seeing a comment there from our lovely Lynn there, she's saying that she can't believe that Joe didn't provide counselling for his campaign manager. That was something that I did actually want to say. I think that was crazy. He should have actually provided counselling for more than just him, especially the guy who got his arm taken off. There should have been counselling there as well. But the fact that he didn't get counselling himself. He see, what was it, a shaman?
Yes.
Somebody, but he didn't get counselling. He didn't seek professional help for any of them, and I definitely think that the campaign manager still needs counselling, and will do continually for quite a long time for that. But yeah, I agree with Lynn that he should have provided counselling.
Is this a good